After my car accident, my parents refused to take my 8-week-old baby. Your sister never has these emergencies, my mother said. She needed a stress-free Caribbean cruise. So I hired elite care from my hospital bed and stopped the $5,500 monthly allowance I had been sending them for 10 years. That is $660,000 gone instantly. Hours later, my grandfather walked into my hospital room, and what he told me changed everything. My name is Simone, and at 32 years old, I am a corporate attorney in Chicago. I thought I had bought my family love with loyalty and checks, but I was wrong. Before I tell you how I made them regret every single moment of that vacation, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family bank but were treated like a stranger when you needed help the most. It started on a Tuesday night in November. The rain was hammering against the windshield of my SUV on Interstate 90. I was driving 10 miles under the speed limit because my entire world, my 8-week-old son Leo, was sleeping in the back seat. I remember looking in the rearview mirror, checking his car seat, feeling that overwhelming fierce love that only a new mother knows. Suddenly, headlights blinded me. A truck swerved across 3 lanes. I slammed on the brakes, but the hydroplane was instant. Tires screeched a sound that tears through your soul. Then the world spun. Metal crunched against metal in a way that sounded like the earth splitting open. Glass shattered, raining down on me like diamonds. When the spinning finally stopped, I was upside down. The smell of gasoline and burnt rubber filled my nose. Pain shot through my right leg like fire, a sharp, jagged agony that made me gasp for air. I tried to move, but the dashboard had crushed my knee. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. Not for myself, but for the back seat. Leo. I tried to scream, but it came out as a whisper. Leo. For 3 terrifying seconds there was silence. Then I heard it. The most beautiful sound in the world. A cry. He was alive. The next hour was a blur of red and blue lights, the jaws of life tearing the door off, and the paramedic telling me to stay awake. I fought the darkness because I could not leave my son. By the time they wheeled me into the emergency room at Northwestern Memorial, my leg was shattered in 2 places and my face was covered in blood. But my mind was crystal clear. I grabbed the head nurse's arm, my fingers digging into her scrubs. "My baby," I gasped. "Where is my son?" "He is fine, honey," she said, her voice soothing but firm. "Social services is on their way to take temporary custody until you are out of surgery. You need to go into the operating room now." "No," I said, panic rising in my chest. "No social services. I have family. Call my parents. They live 20 minutes away. They will come." The nurse nodded and pulled out her phone. I gave her the number for my mother, Evelyn. I expected instant panic from her. I expected her to rush to the hospital to demand to see her grandson. I paid the rent on their $2 million penthouse. I paid for their cars. I was their retirement plan. Surely they would come. The nurse put the phone on speaker because my hands were shaking too much from shock. It rang once, twice. Then my mother picked up. But I did not hear concern. I heard steel drum music. I heard laughter and the clinking of glasses. "Hello, Evelyn speaking," she said, her voice loud and cheerful. "Mom," I choked out, tears finally mixing with the blood on my face. "Mom, it is Simone. I was in a bad accident. The car is totaled. My leg is broken. I need you to come get Leo. I am going into surgery." There was a pause. Not a shocked silence, but a pause of annoyance. I heard her cover the phone slightly and say something to someone nearby. Then she came back on the line. "Simone, are you serious right now?" Her voice was sharp, the cheerfulness gone. "We are literally boarding the ship, the Royal Caribbean. Tanisha and Brad have been planning this anniversary cruise for months. We are in the VIP line." I felt cold, colder than the rain on the highway. "Mom, did you hear me? I could have died. Leo is here alone. I need you. Look, you have insurance, right? Hire a night nurse or something, she said dismissively. Tanisha needs this trip. She has been so stressed lately with her pregnancy scare. We cannot just turn around and lose our deposit because you were not driving carefully. Why do you always have these dramas when we are trying to enjoy ourselves? The room spun, and it was not from the medication. My own mother was choosing a buffet line over her injured daughter and infant grandson. So you are not coming? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We cannot, Simone. Do not be selfish. Send us pictures of the baby when you get settled. We will have bad reception for a week. Bye. The line went dead. The nurse looked at me with pity. I hated that look. It was the look you give a stray dog that nobody wants. She reached out to touch my shoulder, probably to offer some platitude about how they must be in shock. But I flinched away. The tears that had been welling up in my eyes did not fall. Instead, they evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard rage. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips, numbing the pain in my leg. I looked at the ceiling, listening to the beep of the heart monitor. It was steady, just like my resolve. They had made their choice. Now, I would make mine. The silence in a VIP hospital suite is different from the silence in a normal room. It is heavier. It is expensive. I lay there, my right leg encased in a thick plaster cast, elevated on a mountain of pillows. My face throbbed beneath the bandages where the airbag had deployed, but the sharpest pain was not in my shattered tibia or my bruised ribs. It was in my chest, watching a complete stranger hold my son. Her name was Brenda. She was a night nurse from an elite agency I had called 10 minutes after hanging up on my mother. Brenda was in her 50s with warm hands and a soft voice. She rocked Leo gently near the window, humming a low gospel tune that I recognized from my childhood church. It was a scene that should have been tender. Instead, it felt like a transaction. I was paying Brenda $1,000 a shift to do what my mother refused to do for free. I watched the rain streak against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the lights of Chicago. The city looked cold, but it could not possibly be colder than the text message thread on my phone. I reached for it with my left hand, the only limb that wasn't aching. I wanted to see if they had called back. If maybe, just maybe, guilt had overridden their desire for a buffet dinner. There were no new messages from Mom, no missed calls from Dad, no panicked texts from Tanisha asking if her nephew was alive. There was, however, a notification from my bank. I tapped the screen, the blue light stinging my tired eyes. It was an automated alert. Scheduled transfer complete. $5,500 sent to Evelyn and Marcus joint checking. I stared at the number until the digits blurred. $5,500. That was the monthly stipend I had set up 3 years ago when Dad retired. They had made a big show of it back then, crying at the dinner table, praising Jesus for blessing them with a successful daughter. They called it a blessing. I called it duty. In our community, you take care of your elders. You lift as you climb. It is the unwritten rule. But lying in that hospital bed, smelling of antiseptic and dried blood, that rule started to feel less like duty and more like extortion. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me, no longer filtered through the lens of a dutiful daughter. I thought about the time Tanisha accidentally crashed her car 3 months after I bought it for her. Who paid the deductible? I did. I thought about the time Mom needed emergency dental work that cost $6,000. I paid it without blinking, only to see her posting photos of a new designer handbag collection 2 weeks later. I thought about the house. My grandfather had left that property in a trust, but somehow my parents had convinced me that they should live in the main house while I took the smaller apartment in the city to be closer to work. I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy my seat at their table. I thought if I wrote enough checks, if I solved enough crises, if I was the perfect safety net, they would finally love me as much as they loved Tanisha. Tanisha, who never finished college. Tanisha, who was always finding herself. Tanisha, the golden child who was currently sipping a cocktail on a cruise ship I had probably paid for indirectly. I realized then that I was not a daughter to them. I was an asset. I was an investment portfolio with a heartbeat. And assets do not get to have emergencies. Assets are supposed to function silently in the background so the owners can enjoy the dividends. A tear leaked out of the corner of my eye, hot and angry. I wiped it away furiously. Sadness was a luxury I could not afford. Sadness would not protect Leo. Brenda turned from the window, catching my movement. "Is he okay?" she whispered, tilting her head toward the baby. "He is perfect," I said, my voice raspy. "Thank you, Brenda. You get some sleep, honey," she said kindly. "I am right here. I am not going anywhere." It was ironic. A woman I hired over the internet was showing me more loyalty in 4 hours than my blood relatives had shown me in 32 years. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:15 in the morning. My lawyer David would be asleep. But David was on a retainer that cost more than my first car. He would answer. I dialed his number. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Simone? Is everything okay?" "It is the middle of the night." "No, David," I said. The weakness was gone from my voice, replaced by the cold steel of a courtroom prosecutor. "I am in the hospital. I was in a car accident." "My God, do you need me to come there? Do you need to sue the driver?" "I need you to draft some documents," I said, cutting him off. "And I need them ready by 9 a.m. "Okay," he said, the sound of rustling paper coming through the line. He was waking up. "Tell me what we are doing." "First," I said, taking a deep breath, "I want to revoke the power of attorney I signed over to my father regarding the family estate, effective immediately." There was a pause. "Simone, that is a big step. Your father handles all the maintenance vendors for the property." "Not anymore," I said. "Second, I need you to contact the credit card company, the black card ending in 4589. Freeze it. Mark it as compromised." "Compromised?" David asked. "Yes," I said. "It is currently being used to fund a vacation that is unauthorized." And David. "Yes, draft an eviction notice." Silence stretched over the line. Heavy, thick silence. "Eviction." David repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "For the tenants in the penthouse." "For your parents." "Yes," I said. "They have breached the terms of the trust. They failed to provide care to the beneficiary in a time of medical crisis. It is a clause in the original deed my grandfather wrote." "Look it up." "I will look it up, Simone. But are you sure? Once we file this, there is no going back. This is nuclear." I looked over at Brenda rocking my son. I looked at my shattered leg. I thought about the $5,500 that had just left my account to pay for the champagne they were toasting with. "I am sure," I said. "Send the papers to the courier. I will sign them with my left hand if I have to." I hung up the phone and let it drop onto the sheets. The room felt larger now, but less lonely. It felt like a command center. I was broken, yes. I was alone, yes. But for the first time in my life, I was free. The Bank of Simone was officially closed, and when that ship docked, they were going to find out that the currency had changed. I wasn't paying with money anymore. I was paying with justice. 7 days later, the hospital discharged me. I left the building not on my own 2 feet, but in a rented wheelchair, clutching a prescription for painkillers and a discharge summary that listed severe trauma. The ride home was silent. The Uber driver, a kind man named Samuel, helped me into the elevator of my building. He looked at my cast and my struggle and asked if I had someone waiting upstairs to help me. I told him yes. I told him my whole family was there. I lied. When the elevator doors slid open to the penthouse foyer, the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was not the scent of lavender and eucalyptus that usually greeted me, the scent I paid a cleaning service $200 a week to maintain. It was the stale, sour odor of spilled beer and old takeout food. My stomach turned not just from the smell, but from the sinking realization that my sanctuary had been violated. I maneuvered the wheelchair over the threshold, the rubber wheels squeaking against the marble floor. My arms trembled with the effort. My broken leg throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I expected to hear footsteps. I expected to hear my mother's voice crying out, "Oh Lord, my baby is home." I expected my father to rush over and take the heavy bag from my lap. Instead, I heard the television. It was blaring a reality show, the volume turned up so high it vibrated the walls. "Hello," I called out. My voice was weak, raspy from days of pain medication and unused vocal cords. No one answered. I pushed myself further into the living room. The sight that greeted me made me stop cold. The pristine white leather sectional, an Italian import that I had saved for 6 months to buy, was covered in bodies and debris. My mother Evelyn was sprawled on the chaise lounge, a half-eaten bag of chips resting on her chest. My father Marcus was snoring in the recliner. Tanisha was painting her toenails on the coffee table right next to a sticky ring left by a soda can. And Brad, my brother-in-law, was manspreading in the center of the sofa, scratching his stomach. They looked comfortable. They looked settled. They looked like they lived there. And in their minds they did. I cleared my throat louder this time. The sound cut through the noise of the TV. Tanisha looked up first. She didn't jump up. She didn't smile. She just blew on her wet toenails and frowned. "Oh, you are back," she said flatly. "We thought you were staying another week. Mom said the hospital food was free, so why rush home?" The cruelty of the statement took my breath away. I gripped the wheels of my chair until my knuckles turned white. "I am back because my insurance only covers 7 days, Tanisha, and because I missed my son. Where is Leo?" "He is in the nursery with that nanny you hired," my mother said, not bothering to sit up. She waved a dismissive hand in the air. "That woman is rude, Simone. She would not let me hold him while I was eating my Doritos. You need to fire her. She acts like she owns the place." "She is doing her job, Mom," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "She is protecting him, something none of you seem interested in doing." Brad muted the TV then. He finally looked at me, his eyes scanning my cast, my bruised face, and my exhausted posture. There was no sympathy in his gaze, only annoyance. "Hey, since you are up and moving," he said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Did you forget to update the grocery order? I went to grab a Stella Artois earlier, and the fridge is empty. There is only tap water and baby formula. I cannot drink tap water, Simone. It tastes like pipes." The room seemed to tilt. I looked at Brad, this man, who had never held a steady job, who was living in my house, eating my food and sleeping on my sheets. He was complaining about the lack of imported beer to the woman who had just undergone reconstructive surgery on her leg. "You want a beer?" I whispered. "Yeah, a Stella," he said, oblivious to the danger in my tone. "Or a Heineken. I am not picky, but you really dropped the ball this week. The maid didn't come either. Look at this place. It is a mess." I looked around. He was right. It was a mess. Pizza boxes were stacked in the corner. Wine bottles lined the kitchen island like toy soldiers. My beautiful, peaceful home had been turned into a fraternity house for middle-aged moochers. "I am not your maid, Brad," I said, my voice rising, "and I am not your personal shopper. I just got out of the hospital. I can barely walk. And you are asking me about beer." My father stirred in his chair, blinking awake. "Calm down, Simone," he grumbled. "Do not start drama the second you walk in the door. Brad is a guest. Treat him with respect." "Respect?" I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You want respect? I have been paying for your lives for a decade. I pay for this roof. I pay for the food in your bellies. I pay for the clothes on your backs. And when I called you from the emergency room bleeding and terrified, you hung up on me because you didn't want to miss a buffet." Mom sat up, then dusting crumbs off her blouse onto my floor. "You are still on about that. We told you Tanisha needed the break. You are the strong one, Simone. You always handle things. Why do you have to be so petty?" "Petty," I repeated. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked at them, really looked at them. For years I had told myself they loved me. I told myself they were just hard on me because they wanted me to be successful. I told myself that my financial support was a way of honoring my elders, a way of giving back to the community that raised me. But looking at Brad waiting for his beer and my mother wiping cheese dust on my sofa, the illusion shattered. I wasn't their daughter. I wasn't their sister. I was their appliance. I was a refrigerator that dispensed cash. I was a generator that kept their lights on. And when the appliance broke, they didn't try to fix it. They just kicked it and complained that it wasn't working fast enough. I wheeled myself backward away from them. "Where are you going?" Tanisha asked. "We haven't decided what to order for dinner yet." "Dad wants ribs." "I am going to see my son," I said. "And then I am going to bed. Do not disturb me." I spun the chair around and headed down the hallway toward the nursery. Behind me, I heard Brad scoff. "She is so moody lately," he said loud enough for me to hear. "Maybe it is the medication, or maybe she just needs a man." I didn't turn back. I didn't scream. I just kept rolling the rubber wheels humming against the floor. Let them eat their ribs. Let them drink their tap water. Let them enjoy this one last night of comfort. Because tomorrow the eviction notice arrives. And tomorrow the appliance gets unplugged. The first thing I noticed wasn't the apology I deserved, but the mud caked on the soles of Brad's sneakers. Sneakers that were currently resting on my vintage glass coffee table. I watched a clump of dried dirt flake off the rubber tread and land on the glass right next to a coaster that he was deliberately ignoring. It was a small detail, a petty one, but it summed up my entire existence in this family. I was the furniture, I was the foundation, and they were the ones wiping their feet on me. I wheeled myself closer, the cast on my leg heavy and itching in the humid air of the penthouse. Tanisha did not look up from her phone. She was swiping through photos, her long acrylic nails clicking rhythmically against the screen. She looked glowing. Her skin was bronze from the Caribbean sun, her hair was braided in complex, expensive rows, and she was wearing a silk caftan that I knew for a fact cost more than my first car. Finally, she sensed my presence. She didn't ask about the surgery. She didn't ask about the pain. She just turned the phone screen toward me, thrusting it into my face. "Look at this sunset, Simone," she said, her voice dripping with a mix of pity and bragging. We were on the deck of the ship. It was the captain's dinner. The lobster was incredible. "You really missed out." I stared at the image. Tanisha and Brad were holding champagne flutes, smiling wide, oblivious to the world. At the exact moment this photo was taken, I was likely screaming in an MRI machine while doctors tried to determine if my spine was fractured. "It looks nice," I said, my voice flat. "I am glad the weather held up while I was learning how to walk again." Tanisha rolled her eyes and pulled the phone back. "Don't be such a downer. You always do this. You make everything about your drama. But actually, since you are sitting here, we need to talk about what happened in Jamaica." I blinked, confused. "What happened in Jamaica?" "Ocho Rios," she corrected as if the specific port mattered. "We docked on Thursday. I went to the Hermes boutique. They had this limited edition Birkin Simone, the orange one, the one I have been talking about for 2 years. I waited. I knew what was coming, but I wanted to hear her say it. I took it to the counter," she continued, her voice rising with indignation. "The sales lady was wrapping it up. I put down the card, the black card, and do you know what happened? It declined." She said the word declined like it was a slur. "It was humiliating, Simone," she hissed. The machine beeped. Red light. The security guard actually looked at me. I had to leave the bag. I had to walk out of that store empty-handed while people whispered. Do you have any idea how much trauma that caused me? I sat there stunned. The silence in the room stretched thin, ready to snap. I looked at my sister. I looked at her healthy legs, her tanned skin, her utter lack of perspective. "You are traumatized because you could not buy a handbag," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Tanisha, I was in a car accident. I was cut out of a vehicle with the jaws of life. My credit card was declined because I froze it. To stop you from spending my money while I was bleeding." My mother Evelyn, who had been crunching on chips, finally spoke up. She sat up, wiping orange dust onto her pants, her face twisting into a scowl. "Now, Simone." "That is enough," she said, her tone sharp and authoritative. "You are being vindictive. Tanisha didn't know you were freezing the accounts. She thought it was a bank error. She called me crying from the port, crying Simone." She looked at Tanisha with a protective, doting gaze that she had never not once directed at me. "Your sister is in a delicate condition," Mom said, lowering her voice to a dramatic whisper. "She is stressed. She thinks she might be pregnant again. She is eating for two. She needs peace, not financial embarrassment. You make plenty of money. Why are you being so stingy with your own family?" I looked at Tanisha's stomach. It looked the same as it had for 5 years. But that was the trump card, wasn't it? The potential grandchild, the continuation of the line. The excuse for every lazy, selfish decision she had ever made. "So let me get this straight," I said, gripping the armrests of my wheelchair. "You want me to apologize for freezing my card? You want me to reopen the credit line so you can go buy that bag? Is that it?" Brad took his feet off the table, leaving a smudge of dirt behind. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Yeah, basically," he said. "And maybe raise the limit a bit. We have some expenses coming up. The cruise put us back a little. We need to maintain our lifestyle, Simone. People talk. People talk." That was it. That was the final straw. The sheer audacity of it burned through the fog of my painkillers. They didn't see a person in a wheelchair. They saw a broken ATM that needed to be rebooted. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I reached into the tote bag hanging on the back of my chair. My fingers closed around a thick, heavy folder. It contained the police report, the photos of my totaled car, the invoices for my surgery, and the bill for the night nurse. I pulled it out. It was heavy, dense with the reality of my pain. Tanisha was still holding her phone up, showing another picture of a buffet table. I lifted the folder and slammed it down onto the glass table. The sound was like a gunshot. The glass vibrated. The folder landed squarely on top of Tanisha's phone, burying the image of her vacation under the weight of my trauma. Brad jumped. Mom dropped a chip. Tanisha snatched her hand back as if she had been burned. "You want to talk about the card?" I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. "You want to talk about expenses? You want to talk about maintaining a lifestyle?" I leaned forward, ignoring the shooting pain in my leg. "Fine," I said. "Let's talk about money. Let's talk about every single cent. Because the free ride didn't just end, it crashed and burned on Interstate 90. And you are looking at the wreckage." I did not wait for them to recover from the shock of the heavy folder hitting the glass. I had been preparing for this moment for 3 days in my hospital bed. While my bones were knitting back together, I was not just sleeping, I was auditing. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. With a few taps, I connected it to the 85-inch Sony television mounted above the fireplace. The television that I had bought for them last Christmas because Dad said his eyesight was getting bad. The image of Tanisha's vacation photos vanished. In its place, a high-contrast spreadsheet appeared. The background was black, the text was stark white, and the final number at the bottom was highlighted in crimson red. "What is this?" Tanisha asked, squinting at the screen. "Is this an Excel sheet? Who brings a spreadsheet to a family welcome home party?" "It is a receipt," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. I pointed to the first column. "This is rent and utilities for this penthouse over the last 10 years, $240,000. I pointed to the second column. "This is the vehicle leasing and insurance for Dad's Lincoln and Mom's Cadillac, $120,000. I scrolled down. The room was deadly silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. "This column here," I continued, keeping my eyes fixed on my mother. "This is labeled Miscellaneous Lifestyle Support. This covers Tanisha's 3 failed attempts at cosmetology school. It covers the bail money for Brad that one time in Vegas. It covers the dental implants, the cruises, the designer handbags, and the weekly grocery deliveries that seemed to include a lot of filet mignon and imported beer." I looked at them. They were staring at the screen, mouths slightly open. They had never seen it laid out like this. They just saw the money as a stream or river that flowed endlessly. They never thought about the reservoir it was draining from. I tapped the screen one last time to zoom in on the total figure at the bottom, $660,450. I let the number hang in the air. That is how much I have invested in this family in the last decade, I said. That is more than $500,000. That is a retirement fund. That is a college education for Leo. That is a house in the suburbs. And in exchange for that investment, what did I get? I looked at my cast. I got left on the side of the road because you did not want to miss the buffet line. My father Marcus suddenly stood up. His face was turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He slammed his hand down on the armrest of his recliner. "You ungrateful little wretch," he boomed. His voice shook the walls. "Is this what we are doing now? You are calculating the cost of being a daughter. You are itemizing love." "It is not love, Dad," I shot back. "It is a subscription service, and I am canceling it." "How dare you?" he shouted, taking a step toward me. "I raised you. I put a roof over your head for 18 years. I fed you. I clothed you. I drove you to piano lessons. I sacrificed everything so you could go to law school and become a big-shot attorney. And now you want to throw numbers in my face. You think because you have money you are better than us. You owe us, Simone. You owe us everything." I didn't flinch. I didn't roll my wheelchair back. I looked him dead in the eye. "You did what parents are supposed to do, Dad," I said calmly. "You fed me and clothed me because you chose to have a child. That is not a loan. That is parenting. And I have paid you back. I have paid you back 10 times over. $660,000 is enough to pay for my childhood and Tanisha's childhood combined." I motioned to the screen again. "But the debt is settled," I said. "As of today, the books are closed." "What does that mean?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. She looked small, suddenly huddled on the sofa next to Tanisha. "It means the allowance stops," I said. "The $5,500 a month. It is gone. As of this morning, I have canceled the standing order." Panic flickered in Tanisha's eyes. "But how are we supposed to pay for the car insurance? Brad's truck payment is due next week." "Then Brad better go get a job," I said, looking at my brother-in-law. "I hear UPS is hiring." "You cannot do this," Dad sputtered. "We have bills. We have expenses. You cannot just cut us off. We are your family." "I can and I did," I said. "And since you brought up the roof over my head, let's talk about that. From now on, you are responsible for the utilities in this apartment. The electric bill, the water, the cable, the internet. If you want to watch reality TV in 85 inches of high definition, you pay for the subscription. If you want to drink imported beer, you buy it." I wheeled myself toward the hallway, turning my back on their stunned faces. "You have 30 days to figure out your budget," I said over my shoulder, "because I am done setting myself on fire to keep you warm." Behind me, the silence broke. My mother started weeping loudly, a theatrical wail meant to induce guilt. My father was cursing under his breath. Tanisha was whispering frantically to Brad. I rolled into my bedroom and closed the door. I locked it. For the first time in years, the air in the room felt light. I looked at the mirror. I looked tired, broken, and bruised. But the woman staring back at me was richer than she had been 5 minutes ago. I had just saved myself $5,500 a month, and all it cost me was a family that never truly existed. The silence that followed my declaration did not last long. It shattered like a dropped vase, replaced instantly by a cacophony of panic and outrage. From my vantage point in the wheelchair, the scene looked less like a family discussion and more like a riot in a stock exchange floor when the market crashes. They were not looking at me with the eyes of betrayal. They were looking at me with the eyes of addicts who had just been told the supply line was cut. Brad was the first to break formation. He lunged toward the coffee table, his face twisted into a snarl that exposed his yellowing teeth. He pointed a finger at me, a finger that had never done a hard day of labor in its life. "You are joking, right?" He spat spit flying onto the glass table I had just cleaned. "You cannot be serious, Simone. I have a truck payment due on the 15th. The Ford F-150. You know about this. We talked about this at the barbecue last month. You said you wanted us to have reliable transportation for the baby. I looked at him calmly. I said I wanted Tanisha to have a safe car for appointments. I did not agree to finance a $60,000 truck with a lift kit so you could look tough in the mall parking lot. You promised. Brad shouted, his voice cracking. I already spent the cash I had on the rims. If that payment bounces, they will repo the truck. My credit is already shot, Simone. You are going to ruin me over a technicality. A technicality, I repeated. My car accident was a technicality to you. My surgery was a technicality, but your rims are a priority. Before Brad could lunge closer, my mother Evelyn decided it was time for the second act of the performance. She let out a high-pitched gasp, clutching her chest with both hands. It was a move I had seen a dozen times before. Whenever the conversation turned to accountability, Evelyn turned to cardiology. "Oh Lord, my heart," she wailed, stumbling backward until she collapsed onto the sofa cushions. "It is palpitations. I can feel them. My chest is tight. Marcus, get my pills. She is trying to kill me. She is trying to stress me into a grave." My father Marcus, who had been purple with rage a moment ago, immediately switched into enabler mode. He rushed to her side, fanning her with a magazine. "Look what you are doing to your mother," he roared at me, not even looking at the woman he was comforting. "She has high blood pressure, Simone. Do you want her blood on your hands? Is money more important to you than your mother life?" I watched them with a detachment that surprised me. Years ago, I would have been rushing to get the water. I would have been apologizing, writing a check just to lower her heart rate. But today I saw the performance for what it was. Her color was fine. Her breathing was rhythmic, not labored. She was peering at me through one squinted eye to see if the guilt trip was working. "Call 911 then," I said flatly. The room froze. My mother stopped moaning for a split second. "If it is a medical emergency, Dad, you should call an ambulance," I continued. "I just came from the hospital. I am sure they have a bed open." "You heartless witch," Tanisha screamed. She jumped up from the chair, throwing her phone onto the floor. She marched toward me, stopping only when her stomach bumped against the footrest of my wheelchair. She placed both hands on her belly, framing it like a precious artifact. "It is not just Mom," she yelled, her eyes bulging. "I am pregnant, Simone. Maybe. I am stressed. Do you know what cortisol does to a fetus? You are poisoning my baby with your selfishness. If I miscarry, it is on you. You are a murderer." The accusation hung in the air, gross and heavy. She was using an unborn child, a child that might not even exist, as a weapon to secure a credit line. Brad chimed in, sensing an opening. "Yeah, think about the baby, Simone. You want your niece or nephew to grow up poor. You want us to be homeless. That is what you are doing. You are evicting a baby." I gripped the wheels of my chair. The nausea rose in my throat, not from pain but from disgust. These people were bottomless pits. There was no amount of money, no amount of sacrifice that would ever be enough. If I gave them my blood, they would complain that it wasn't the right type. "I am not evicting a baby," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am evicting 4 able-bodied adults who have forgotten how to survive without a host." I engaged the motors on my electric wheelchair, hearing the whirring sound as I reversed away from them. "You have 30 days," I said again. "Where are you going?" my father shouted. "We are not done talking. You do not walk away from your father." "I am not walking, Dad," I said. "I am rolling. And yes, we are done." I spun the chair around, navigating the obstacle course of their clutter. Behind me, the noise erupted again. My mother was wailing louder, realizing the ambulance bluff hadn't worked. Tanisha was sobbing into Brad's shoulder, screaming that she felt a cramp. Brad was kicking the coffee table, cursing about his truck. I reached my bedroom door. I rolled inside. I closed the heavy oak door. And then, with a click that felt more satisfying than any gavel I had ever slammed in a courtroom, I turned the deadbolt lock. The sound of their chaos was muffled instantly. I was in my sanctuary. I looked at the bed, crisp and clean. I looked at the crib in the corner where Leo was sleeping soundly oblivious to the war outside. I exhaled a long, shaky breath. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. They were trembling from the adrenaline of freedom. I had fired the first shot. I knew they wouldn't go quietly. They would come back harder. They would come back dirtier. But for tonight, the bank was closed, and the vault was locked from the inside. The blue light of my smartphone screen was the only thing illuminating the darkness of my bedroom. It was 3 in the morning, but my phone was buzzing with the relentless angry energy of a beehive that had just been kicked. I had locked the door to keep my family out, but I had forgotten that in the 21st century walls do not stop emotional violence. It travels through fiber optic cables and Wi-Fi signals delivering poison directly into your hand. I lay next to Leo's crib watching the notifications stack up. It started with a single ping, then another, and then a cascade that turned my lock screen into a wall of judgment. The source of the commotion was a Facebook post. My mother Evelyn had not gone to sleep after our confrontation. She had gone to war. And her battlefield of choice was the Sisters of Grace Prayer Circle, a group with 500 members, including every busybody, gossip, and matriarch in our community. I opened the app, my thumb hovering over the screen. I knew I should not look. I knew it was a trap. But the conditioning of a dutiful daughter is hard to break. I clicked on the notification. There was a photo of my mother. It was an old one taken years ago at a funeral, where she looked appropriately somber and tearful. The caption below it was a masterpiece of manipulation. "Saints, I come to you tonight with a spirit so heavy it feels like lead." The Bible says honor your father and mother, but the devil is working hard in my own home tonight. My daughter, who God blessed with wealth and success, has turned her back on the very people who prayed her into that position. She has closed her heart. She has threatened to put her elderly parents and her pregnant sister on the street. We are hungry. We are scared. Please pray for Simone's soul that the demon of greed releases her. We only wanted to love her, but money has turned her cold. I read the words twice, feeling a physical blow to my stomach. Hungry. Scared. On the street. Stands. We were currently sitting in a penthouse that I paid for with a refrigerator full of food that I bought. But facts do not matter when you are playing the victim for an audience. I scrolled down to the comments. They were devastating. Sister Margaret wrote, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Shame on her. You sacrificed everything for that girl." Deacon Jones commented, "This is what happens when our children forget their roots. They get a little education and think they are better than the village that raised them. Stay strong, Sister Evelyn." Then came the direct messages. My phone started vibrating in my hand. It was Auntie Bernice. She was my father's older sister, the matriarch of the extended family, a woman whose tongue was sharper than a switchblade. I knew if I did not answer, she would call the house landline and wake up Leo. I slid the bar to answer. "Auntie Bernice." I started keeping my voice low. "Do not auntie me," she snapped, her voice crackling with static and indignation. "I just saw your mother's post. Is it true? Did you really cut off their grocery money? Did you really tell your pregnant sister to get out?" "It is not that simple, Auntie," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "They left me at the hospital. I was in a car wreck. They went on a cruise." "I do not want to hear excuses, Simone," she yelled. "You are the strong one. You have always been the strong one. Your mother is fragile. Your sister is struggling. God gave you broad shoulders so you could carry the load. That is the black tax girl. We lift each other up. We do not kick our kin when they are down. You make 6 figures. What is $5,000 to you? It is pocket change, but to them it is survival." "It is not pocket change," I whispered. "It is my son's future." "It is greed," Bernice declared. "You are acting like those corporate people you work with. You are forgetting who you are. If you throw your parents away over money, do not expect to show your face at the family reunion. Do not expect to sit in the front pew on Sunday. You will be dead to us." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Guilt, heavy and suffocating, washed over me. It was a familiar weight, one I had carried since I was a child. The fear of being selfish, the fear of being uppity, the fear of being ostracized by the only tribe I had ever known. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I should have given them a warning first. Maybe I could just pay the truck note for Brad just for this month. The voice of my conditioning whispered in my ear, telling me to fix it. Telling me to go out there, apologize, write the check, and restore the peace. It would be so easy. Just one signature and the attacks would stop. My mother would delete the post. Auntie Bernice would love me again. I looked at the door. I could unlock it. I could go back to being the good daughter. The ATM. The doormat. Then a soft sound broke through the noise in my head. It was a rustle of sheets. I turned toward the crib in the corner. Leo was stirring. He let out a small, soft sigh and turned his head. In the dim light of the street lamps filtering through the blinds, I could see his tiny hand gripping the edge of his blanket. I wheeled myself over to the crib. I looked down at him. He was so small, so perfect, and so completely dependent on me. I thought about what Auntie Bernice said. God gave you broad shoulders so you could carry the load. But who was carrying me? Who had carried me when I was bleeding in that car? Who had carried me when I was sobbing in the emergency room? If I gave in now, if I opened that door and wrote that check, I wasn't just hurting myself. I was hurting Leo. I was teaching him that love is transactional. I was teaching him that it is okay to be abused as long as it is by family. I was setting him up to be the next generation's bank account. 10 years from now, would Tanisha be asking Leo for money? Would they guilt him into paying for their mistakes? I reached out and gently touched Leo's cheek. His skin was warm and soft. No, I whispered into the darkness. The cycle stops with me. The guilt did not vanish, but it shifted. It hardened into resolve. I was not abandoning my family. I was protecting my son. And if protecting him meant being the villain in their story, then I would be the villain. I would be the worst villain they had ever seen. I picked up my phone again. I did not delete the app. I did not reply to the comments. Instead, I went to the settings menu. I found the block button. I blocked Auntie Bernice. I blocked Deacon Jones. I blocked Sister Margaret. And finally, with a deep breath that felt like breaking the surface of the water after drowning, I temporarily deactivated my own account. The notifications stopped. The buzzing ceased. The room was quiet again. I looked at my son one last time. Mommy is going to fight for you, I promised him. And we are going to win. I turned off the phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. Tomorrow the eviction notice would arrive. They thought they could shame me into submission. They forgot that I was a lawyer. I dealt with facts, not feelings. And the fact was, this environment was toxic. And I was about to clean it up. The house was silent, but it was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a battlefield during a ceasefire. I had not slept since blocking my family on social media. My mind was racing, replaying the comments, the accusations, and the sheer betrayal of the people I shared DNA with. But around 2 in the morning, a different sound pulled me from my thoughts. It was not a notification ping. It was a physical sound. The distinct, high-pitched creak of the third floorboard in the hallway. I knew that creak. I had grown up in this house even if my parents claimed it was theirs. I knew every groan of the settling wood, and I knew that the third floorboard was directly outside my home office. My office was my sanctuary. It was where I billed clients $400 an hour. It was where I kept my client files, my contracts, and the small fireproof safe where I kept my passport and emergency cash. I looked at the baby monitor. Leo was asleep, his chest rising and falling rhythmically. I made a split-second decision. I did not call out. I did not turn on the light. I slid out of bed and into my wheelchair. The rubber wheels were silent on the plush carpet. I was a ghost in my own home, gliding toward the source of the noise. The hallway was dark, but a faint beam of light was dancing underneath the door of my office. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had locked that door. I always locked that door. I rolled closer, my hand gripping the wheel rim so tight my knuckles ached. I reached the door handle. It was unlocked. Someone had picked the lock or used the emergency key that was supposed to be hidden in the kitchen. I pushed the door open. The beam of light swung wildly and hit me in the face, blinding me for a second. "What the hell?" a male voice hissed. My eyes adjusted. Standing behind my mahogany desk, illuminated by the flashlight on his phone, was Brad. He had forced open the top drawer, the one with the lock. Papers were scattered on the floor. My checkbook was in his hand. "Brad," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Put it down." He did not drop it. He did not look ashamed. He looked annoyed, like a teenager caught stealing a beer from the fridge, not a grown man committing a felony. "I am looking for the emergency card, Simone," he said, his voice rough. "I know you have one. Tanisha said you keep a stash of cash and a backup visa in the safe. What is the combination?" "Get out of my office," I ordered. "You are trespassing." "Trespassing," he laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I live here, remember? You cannot trespass in your own house. And I need that card. The truck payment is tomorrow. I am not losing my Ford because you are having a mental breakdown." He took a step around the desk. He was big, tall, broad-shouldered, and fueled by a toxic mix of entitlement and desperation. In the courtroom, I was 6 feet tall. I was powerful. But here in a wheelchair with a cast on my leg, I was sitting at his waist level. I had never felt so small. I wheeled backward instinctively, creating distance. "Brad, if you do not leave this room right now, I am calling the police." He stopped. The flashlight beam lowered, casting long, distorted shadows on his face. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his expression shifted from annoyance to something darker. It was a look of calculation. He was assessing the threat level. And he realized that physically, there was no threat. "You are not calling anyone," he said, taking a slow step toward me. "You think you are so tough, don't you? The big bad lawyer. But look at you. You are a single woman with a broken leg in a big empty house." My stomach turned over. This was not just a greedy brother-in-law anymore. This was a predator. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, my hand slowly moving toward the pocket of my robe where my phone was hidden. "I am just stating facts, Simone," he said, stepping closer until he was looming over me. "Accidents happen. You already had one car crash. It would be a shame if you fell out of that chair. Or if you slipped in the shower. People might think you were just clumsy." The air in the room grew thin. He was weaponizing my vulnerability. He was telling me that my safety was conditional on my compliance. "Give me the combination," he demanded, extending his hand. "Or tell me where the cash is. I am not leaving empty-handed." I acted on instinct. I pressed the side button on my phone 3 times through the fabric of my pocket. It was a shortcut I had set up years ago for client meetings. It started a voice recording instantly. "I do not have cash in the house," I lied, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling in my legs. "And the safe is empty. I moved everything to a safety deposit box yesterday." He stared at me, searching for the lie. He looked at the checkbook in his hand, then threw it onto the desk in disgust. "You are lying," he spat. "But fine, have it your way. Just remember what I said, Simone. You are vulnerable here. You cannot protect yourself. And you definitely cannot protect that baby if you are laid up in a hospital bed again." The mention of Leo sent a jolt of adrenaline through me that was so sharp it almost hurt. "Get out," I whispered. He smirked, satisfied that he had instilled fear. He walked past me deliberately, bumping his hip against my shoulder, spinning the wheelchair slightly. "I will find it eventually," he said as he walked into the hallway. "And you better unlock the accounts by tomorrow, or things are going to get uncomfortable." I waited until I heard his heavy footsteps recede down the hall and the door to the guest room slam shut. Only then did I let out the breath I had been holding. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen was glowing red. Recording. I stopped the recording and pressed play. Brad's voice, clear as day, filled the silence. It would be a shame if you fell out of that chair. You cannot protect that baby. I saved the file and uploaded it immediately to my cloud storage. Then I emailed a copy to my lawyer, David. I sat there in the dark, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Brad was right about one thing. I was vulnerable. I was physically compromised. But he was wrong about the rest. He thought he had intimidated me into submission. He thought fear would make me open the wallet. He did not know that he had just handed me the most powerful weapon in a legal arsenal. He had given me cause. This wasn't just a dispute about money anymore. This was a domestic threat, and I knew exactly how to handle threats. I looked at the open drawer, the violated sanctuary of my work. I was not going to sleep tonight. I rolled my chair over to the desk, pulled out a fresh legal pad, and uncapped a pen. If they wanted a war, they were going to get a war. And unlike them, I was not going to fight with fists or vague threats. I was going to fight with the law. And the law takes no prisoners. The morning sun did not bring warmth into the penthouse. Instead, it cast long, hard shadows across the kitchen island where my parents were waiting for me. I wheeled myself into the room, my eyes gritty from a sleepless night of guarding my home against my own brother-in-law. I expected silence. I expected the cold shoulder. What I found was an ambush. My father, Marcus, was standing by the coffee machine, his arms crossed over his chest. My mother, Evelyn, was seated at the counter, her hands clasped around a mug of tea, staring at the marble surface with the intensity of a judge about to deliver a death sentence. They did not look like parents concerned for their injured daughter. They looked like loan sharks coming to collect a debt. "Sit down, Simone," my father said. His voice was not loud, but it had a rumble to it that vibrated in my chest. "We need to settle this nonsense once and for all." I stopped my wheelchair at the end of the island, keeping a safe distance. "There is nothing to settle, Dad," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I gave you my terms. You have 29 days left to vacate." Marcus slammed his hand onto the counter. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. "Enough," he barked. "I am done playing games with you. You think because you have a law degree you can dictate how this family operates. You think you can humiliate us. You think you can starve us. Well, you are forgetting one thing. You are not the only one with rights." I looked at him confused. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn looked up then. Her eyes were dry, clear, and terrifyingly cold. She took a slow sip of her tea before setting the mug down with a deliberate click. "We spoke to a lawyer this morning, Simone," she said softly. "A nice man from the church. He told us about something very interesting. It is called grandparents' rights." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what she was talking about. It was a legal statute that allowed grandparents to petition for visitation or even custody if they could prove it was in the child's best interest. But it was rarely granted unless the parent was unfit. "You are unfit, Simone," my mother continued, answering the question I hadn't asked aloud. "Look at you. You are crippled. You are traumatized. You are barely sleeping." And we found the pill bottles. She reached into her pocket and pulled out my prescription for oxycodone, the one the surgeon had given me for the excruciating pain of a shattered tibia. She placed the orange bottle on the counter. "You are an addict," she declared. I stared at her, my mouth falling open. "I have taken 2 pills in 3 days, Mom. I am in agony." "That is a prescription from a trauma surgeon." "That is not what we will tell the judge." Marcus interrupted, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "We will tell the judge that since the accident you have been erratic, unstable. We will tell them you are abusing your medication. We will tell them you are hallucinating, seeing thieves in the night, cutting off your family in a paranoid rage. And with your leg," Evelyn added, smoothing her silk robe, "you cannot even carry Leo to his crib. What if you drop him? What if you pass out from the drugs and he chokes? The court will see that you are a danger to that baby. they will grant us emergency temporary custody. We will take Leo Simone. We will raise him in this house properly, and you can visit him on weekends under supervision. The room spun. This was not just extortion. This was evil. They were threatening to take my 8-week-old son. They were willing to paint me as a drug addict to destroy my professional reputation and my motherhood just to keep their access to my bank account. I looked at my father. He looked triumphant. I looked at my mother. She looked self-righteous. They did not care about Leo. They saw him as leverage. If they had custody of Leo, they had control of the child support. They had control of the house. They had control of me. So here's the deal, Marcus said, leaning over the counter so he loomed above me. You reinstate the allowance. In fact, you raise it. $7,000 a month. For pain and suffering. You unlock the credit cards. You rip up that eviction notice. And you sign a document giving us power of attorney over your finances until you are fully recovered, which could take years. Do that, Evelyn whispered, and we will forget about the court case. We will forget you are a junkie. We will be a happy family again. I gripped the armrests of my wheelchair until my fingernails dug into the leather. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the coffee pot at them. But I knew that any display of anger would only prove their point. They were baiting me. If I exploded, I was unstable. If I fought back, I was aggressive. I had to be smarter. I had to be a lawyer. I lowered my head, letting my shoulders slump. I forced my breathing to become shallow. I let the tears that were burning my eyes spill over. You would really take him, I whispered, my voice trembling. You would really take Leo away from me. We do not want to. Evelyn said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. But we have to protect our grandson, unless you make the right choice. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I cannot lose him, I said, looking up at them with pleading eyes. He is all I have. Please, do not call the courts. Then pay up, Marcus said. Okay, I said, wiping my face. Okay. You win. I cannot fight you. I am too tired. And I am in too much pain. I saw the relief wash over them. They exchanged a look of victory. They thought they had broken me. They thought the threat of losing Leo was the checkmate. I will sign whatever you want, I continued. But we need to do it properly. I need to explain the trust fund transfers to you so there are no mistakes with the IRS. And I want everyone here. Tanisha and Brad too. I want us all to be on the same page so this never happens again. That sounds sensible, Evelyn said, smiling for the first time in days. We can do it tonight, over dinner. We will order steaks. Tonight, I agreed. 7 o'clock. I will have the papers ready. I turned my wheelchair around, keeping my head down so they could not see my eyes. Because if they had looked closely, they would not have seen defeat. They would have seen the cold, hard calculation of a predator luring prey into a trap. I rolled back toward my room. I was going to call David. And then I was going to make one more call. A call to the only person in this family who actually owned this house. My parents thought they were holding the aces. They did not know I was about to bring in the entire casino. Tonight at 7 o'clock, the game was going to change forever. The moment the kitchen door clicked shut behind my parents, the tears stopped. They vanished as if a faucet had been turned off. I sat there for a moment, listening to their muffled voices in the living room. They were laughing. I heard the clink of a bottle opener. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought the threat of taking my son had broken me. They had no idea that they had just handed me the match to burn their entire kingdom to the ground. I wheeled myself into my office and locked the door. This time I jammed a rubber doorstop under it for good measure. I did not have much time. 7 o'clock was 5 hours away. I needed to turn this penthouse from a home into a courtroom. I picked up my phone and dialed David. He answered on the first ring. Is it done? I asked. It is done, he replied, his voice crisp. The courier is on his way with the physical copies. I also attached the digital files from the private investigator regarding the cruise spending. Simone, are you sure you want to do this without me present? I am sure, I said. If you are here, they will clam up. They will demand their own counsel. I need them comfortable. I need them arrogant. I need them to think they are signing a victory treaty, not a confession. I hung up and opened my laptop. The printer began to whir a rhythmic mechanical sound that calmed my racing heart. I watched the pages slide out one by one. Each sheet was a nail in the coffin of our relationship. First came the cruise folio. It was 20 pages long. I highlighted the charges in neon yellow. $300 for a couple's massage while I was in surgery. $400 for a bottle of Dom Perignon while I was begging a nurse for pain medication. $2,000 for an excursion to swim with dolphins while my son was being cared for by a stranger. It was a timeline of neglect, itemized and dated. Next, I pulled up the video file from last night. I watched Brad's face on the screen, shadowed and menacing. It would be a shame if you fell out of that chair. I burned the video to 3 separate USB drives. One for the police, one for David, and one to play on the big screen tonight. But the most important document was the last one to print. It was a copy of a deed from 1990. The paper looked old even in the scan. It bore the signature of the man who had actually built this family's wealth. The man my parents had shoved into a nursing home the moment he became inconvenient. I organized the files into 4 neat stacks. I placed them inside crisp navy blue folders. They looked official. They looked lethal. I rolled out of the office and into the dining room. My parents and Tanisha were on the balcony smoking and drinking, oblivious to my movements. I worked quickly. I cleared the table of the decorative vase and the placemats. I wiped the mahogany surface until it shone like a mirror. I placed a chair at the head of the table, not my wheelchair. A high-backed leather armchair that I dragged over from the reading nook. It was the seat of authority. I placed the 4 folders at the other seats. I set up my laptop and connected it to the television, ensuring the screen was blank. The room felt different now. The warmth was gone. The soft lighting was replaced by the stark overhead chandelier. I was not setting the table for dinner. I was setting the stage for an execution. I went back to the nursery to check on Leo. He was awake, kicking his legs in his crib. I picked him up, balancing his warm weight against my shoulder. "We are almost done, baby," I whispered into his soft hair. "Tonight the bad people go away. Tonight we get our house back." I fed him, changed him, and put him back down. I needed to be unencumbered. I needed to be sharp. At 6:55 the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the apartment. On the balcony the chatter stopped. My mother poked her head in through the sliding glass door. "That must be the food," she said, her eyes lighting up. "We ordered surf and turf from Mastro's." "On your card, of course, since we are celebrating." I sat at the end of the table, my hands folded on my lap. "It is not the food," I said. My father frowned, stepping into the room. "Then who is it? We did not invite anyone. You said this was a family meeting." "It is a family meeting," I said. "I just invited the head of the family." Brad laughed, walking in with a beer in his hand. "Who you think you are, the head of the family, because you write the checks?" I did not answer. I pressed the button to unlock the front door. We heard the heavy oak door creak open. We heard the thud of a cane against the marble floor. Thud. Step. Thud. Step. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm that silenced the room instantly. Tanisha's jaw dropped. My mother's glass of wine paused halfway to her mouth. My father turned pale, his eyes widening in genuine fear. Standing in the entryway, wearing a 3-piece suit that was slightly too big for his shrinking frame, but still radiating an undeniable power, was my grandfather. Otis. He did not smile. He did not say hello. He looked at the beer in Brad's hand. He looked at the tan on Tanisha's skin. And then he looked at me. I nodded. He walked past my stunned father without a word, and took the high-backed leather chair I had placed at the head of the table. He rested his hands on the cane and looked around the room with eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. "Sit down," Otis commanded. His voice was gravel and iron. My father scrambled to a seat like a scolded child. My mother sat down, her hands shaking. Brad and Tanisha slumped into their chairs, the arrogance draining out of them like water from a cracked cup. I wheeled myself to the foot of the table. The trap was set, the players were seated, and the judge had just banged the gavel. The sound of the cane striking the marble floor was rhythmic and heavy, like the ticking of a grandfather clock counting down to an explosion. Thud. Step. Thud. Step. My grandfather Otis walked into the dining room with a slowness that was not born of frailty, but of authority. He was 82 years old, but tonight he looked like the titan of industry he had been 40 years ago. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that I knew was at least 2 decades old. The lapels were wide, the fabric was heavy wool, and it was pressed to absolute perfection. In a room full of people wearing trendy designer athleisure and flashy jewelry, he looked like the only serious person in the world. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air, which had been thick with the smell of expensive steak and arrogant laughter, suddenly felt thin and cold. My family froze. It was instinctual primal fear. They were the hyenas feasting on a carcass, and the lion had just walked out of the tall grass. My father Marcus was the first to snap out of the paralysis. He practically leaped from his chair, wiping his greasy hands on his pants. A nervous plastic smile plastered itself onto his face as he rushed toward the entryway. "Dad," he exclaimed, his voice cracking slightly. "What a surprise! We were not expecting you. Why didn't you call? I would have sent the driver to pick you up. You should not be out this late." Otis did not stop walking. He did not smile. He did not reach out to take my father's extended hand. He simply looked at Marcus with eyes that were dark, deep, and utterly unimpressed. He looked at the sweat beading on my father's forehead. He looked at the half-empty wine bottles on the table. And then he looked at me sitting quietly at the foot of the table in my wheelchair. "I was in the neighborhood," Otis said. His voice was low, gravelly, and carried a weight that made the crystal glasses on the table seem to tremble. "Simone called me. She said there was a matter of urgency regarding the estate." Marcus laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound that grated on my ears. "Oh, you know Simone. She is dramatic. Since the accident, she has been a little confused. The medication, you know, it messes with the mind. We were just having a family dinner to calm her down. We are handling everything, Dad. You do not need to worry your head about it. Go sit in the living room, and I will bring you some tea." Otis stopped. He slowly turned his head to look at my father. It was the look a master carpenter gives to a piece of wood that has rotted from the inside out. "I did not come for tea," Marcus Otis said. "And I do not think Simone is confused. I think she is the only person in this room who knows exactly what time it is." He walked past my father, leaving him standing there with his hand still foolishly extended. Otis approached the table. Brad, who had been slouching with his feet hooked around the chair legs, sat up so fast he almost knocked over his beer. Tanisha looked down at her lap, refusing to make eye contact. My mother Evelyn adjusted her silk robe, trying to summon some semblance of dignity. "Hello, Papa Otis," Evelyn murmured. We are just discussing the future of the family." Otis ignored her. He walked to the head of the table, to the high-backed leather chair I had placed there. He rested his cane against the edge of the table. He placed his fedora on the empty seat next to him. Then he lowered himself into the chair. He did not slouch. He sat with his spine straight, his hands folded on the mahogany surface right next to the blue folder I had prepared for him. He looked at the 4 folders I had distributed. He looked at the laptop connected to the television. He looked at the silence that had descended upon the room. "Well," Otis said, looking at each of them in turn. "Why is everyone standing? Sit down." Marcus scrambled back to his seat. He pulled his chair in, looking like a schoolboy called to the principal office. Brad put his beer bottle on the floor, trying to hide it. Tanisha kept picking at her cuticles. "We are all here," my father said, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Now, Dad, before Simone starts with her hysterics, I want you to know the context. We are worried about the baby. Simone is unstable. We are just trying to ensure that our grandson is raised in a safe environment. We are prepared to take custody if necessary. It is a burden, of course, but family is family. I watched my father dig his own grave. He was using the same manipulative script he had used on me, thinking it would work on the man who raised him. He thought Otis would side with tradition. He thought Otis would agree that the elders should control the children. Otis did not nod. He did not agree. He turned his gaze toward me. "Is that true?" Simone Otis asked. "Are you unstable?" "No, grandfather." I said, my voice steady. "I am injured, but my mind is clear, and I called this meeting because I am done being threatened." Marcus slammed his hand on the table again, though with less force this time. "See? She is lying. She is hostile. She cuts us off financially and then plays the victim." Otis raised one hand, a single callous finger pointed upward. Silence fell instantly. "I did not come here to listen to bickering," Otis said. He tapped the blue folder in front of him. "Simone said she has prepared a presentation, a financial review. Since I am the one who started this family business 40 years ago with a shovel and a pickup truck, I think I am entitled to see where the money is going." But Dad Marcus protested weakly. "This is private. This is between me and my daughter." "Nothing in this house is private," Marcus, Otis snapped. "Especially not when you are threatening to take a child away from his mother." He looked at me and nodded. "A signal." "Start the meeting," Simone Otis commanded. "I do not have all day. And I certainly do not have the patience for lies." I wheeled myself closer to the laptop. I plugged in the HDMI cable. The television screen flickered to life, casting a harsh white glow over the dimly lit room. The first slide appeared. It was not a spreadsheet. It was a photo of my grandfather standing in front of his first apartment building in 1982, covered in dust, smiling with exhaustion and pride. I saw Tanisha roll her eyes. I saw Brad check his watch. I saw my parents exchange a worried glance. They were terrified, but they were trapped. They had to sit there. They had to listen. Because the man at the head of the table was the only god they truly worshipped, the god of money. And they were terrified he was about to cast them out of heaven. The air in the room was so tight it felt like a violin string pulled to the breaking point. One wrong move, one sharp word, and everything would snap. I placed my hand on the keyboard. "Let us begin," I said. My mother Evelyn decided that silence was not a strategy she could afford. She reached into the sleeve of her silk robe and produced a lace handkerchief. It was a prop I had seen her use at funerals, weddings, and once at a traffic court hearing to get out of a speeding ticket. She dabbed at eyes that were completely dry, sniffing loudly enough to ensure everyone in the room, especially my grandfather, heard her distress. "Papa Otis," she began, her voice trembling with a practiced vibrato, "I am so glad you are here. Truly I am, because I do not know what to do anymore. I am at my wit's end." She looked at me, then quickly looked away as if the sight of me caused her physical pain. "We raised her right, Papa," she continued. "Marcus and I, we gave her everything. I labored for 20 hours to bring her into this world. I sat up with her when she had chicken pox. We pushed her to study, we pushed her to be excellent, and we were so proud when she became a lawyer. We thought finally our little girl made it." She paused for effect, letting out a ragged sigh. "But success has changed her. It has hardened her heart. Look at us sitting here. We are terrified. We are walking on eggshells in our own home. She controls everything, Papa. She controls the food we eat. She controls the lights in the ceiling. She treats us like employees, not parents. And now she is threatening to throw us out on the street. Her own flesh and blood. Can you imagine the shame? Can you imagine the neighbors watching us pack our bags because our daughter decided she loves her bank account more than her mother?" I sat at the foot of the table watching her performance with the detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. Years ago, this speech would have crushed me. I would have been on my knees apologizing, begging for forgiveness. But tonight, I saw the cracks in the facade. I saw the way her eyes darted to the blue folder in front of Otis, trying to gauge if he had opened it yet. Tanisha, sensing that her mother needed backup, jumped into the fray. She slumped in her chair, wrapping her arms around her stomach protectively. "It is true," Grandpa Tanisha whispered, her voice small and childlike. "I am scared of her. You should have seen her yesterday. She screamed at me because I bought a handbag. I am pregnant, Grandpa. I am trying to keep this baby safe, but Simone is so angry all the time. She looks at me with such hate. She told me to get a job at UPS. Me, a pregnant woman." Tanisha sniffed, wiping a tear that actually managed to squeeze out. "She is jealous," Tanisha added, delivering the line she had likely rehearsed with Brad. "She is jealous because I have a husband who loves me, and she is alone. She wants to punish us for being happy." Brad nodded vigorously, taking a sip of his warm beer before remembering who was watching and putting it back down. "Yeah, Mr. Otis," Brad said. "It is a hostile environment. That is what it is. We are just trying to support her recovery, but she is lashing out. She is verbally abusive. I fear for my wife's safety. I really do." I remained motionless. I did not roll my eyes. I did not scoff. I did not interrupt. I kept my hands folded on my lap, my face a mask of absolute neutrality. I let their lies fill the room, stacking up like dry tinder waiting for a spark. At the head of the table, Otis did not move. He did not offer a tissue to Evelyn. He did not comfort Tanisha. He simply sat there staring at the mahogany table surface. Then he began to tap. It was his index finger. Tap, tap, tap. A slow, rhythmic sound against the wood. It was the only sound in the room as my family's monologue trailed off. They looked at him, waiting for his outrage, waiting for him to bang his cane and demand I apologize. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm was maddening. It was the sound of time running out. It was the sound of a judge who had heard enough hearsay and was waiting for the evidence. My father Marcus mistook the silence for contemplation. He thought Otis was processing the heartbreak of his son. Marcus leaned forward, confident that he had swayed the jury. He placed both hands on the table, assuming the posture of the patriarch he desperately wanted to be. "You see, Dad," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial baritone. "This is why we called the meeting. We need to do an intervention. Simone is clearly having a breakdown. The drugs, the trauma, the stress of being a single mother. It has broken her mind. She is making irrational decisions." Marcus gestured toward me with a sweep of his hand. "She needs help, Dad. Professional help. And until she gets it, she cannot be in charge of the finances. She certainly cannot be in charge of that baby alone. Evelyn and I are willing to step in. We are willing to take guardianship. But she is fighting us. She is defying the natural order of this family." He looked at Otis, expecting a nod of agreement. "You need to handle her, Dad," Marcus said, delivering his final plea. "You are the head of this family. You need to put her back in her place. You need to teach her that she cannot disrespect her father. She is running wild. She is ruining this family legacy. Tell her, Dad. Tell her to sign the papers and go to her room." Marcus sat back, crossing his arms, a smug smile touching his lips. He had played the ultimate card. He had appealed to male authority. He had appealed to tradition. He was certain that Otis would never side with a disobedient daughter over a dutiful son. The tapping stopped. Otis lifted his hand from the table. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. He slowly turned his head to look at Marcus. The expression on his face was not anger, it was something far worse. It was disappointment. Otis reached out and placed his hand on the blue folder I had prepared for him. He did not open it yet. He just rested his palm on it as if feeling the weight of the truth inside. "Is that what you think?" Marcus Otis asked quietly. "You think she is ruining the legacy?" "Yes, Dad," Marcus replied, confident. "She is." Otis stared at him for a long moment, then turned his gaze to me. "Open the laptop, Simone," he commanded. I wheeled myself to the keyboard. The screen behind me flared to life again. The stage was set. The actors had said their lines. Now it was time for the reviews, and I had a feeling they were not going to like what the critics had to say. The glow of the laptop screen cast a harsh artificial light across the dining table, illuminating the sweat that had begun to bead on my father's upper lip. But no one was looking at the screen yet. All eyes were fixed on the man at the head of the table. My grandfather Otis sat with the stillness of a mountain. He did not look at the spreadsheet I had prepared. He did not look at the photos of the cruise. He kept his gaze fixed squarely on his son Marcus. It was a look I had never seen before. Usually Otis looked at my father with a mix of tolerance and mild amusement. But tonight the amusement was gone. In its place was a cold, clinical disappointment that seemed to lower the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Marcus Otis said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that vibrated through the wood of the table. You said something interesting a moment ago. You said Simone is defying the natural order. You said she is ruining the legacy of this house. My father straightened his spine, sensing an opportunity to reiterate his authority. He puffed out his chest, adjusting the lapels of his blazer. Yes, Dad, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. That is exactly what I said. This is my house. I am the patriarch here. I make the rules. And when a child, even a grown one, starts trying to dictate terms to the man who owns the roof over her head, that is a violation of everything we believe in. Otis nodded slowly. He tapped his finger on the mahogany surface one more time. So you are claiming ownership? Otis asked. You are telling me and everyone at this table that this penthouse, this property belongs to you. Absolutely, Marcus replied without hesitation. I have lived here for 20 years. I have maintained it. It is the family seat. It is my asset. I watched my father speak, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. He believed his own lie. He had lived inside the delusion for so long that he had forgotten the foundation it was built on. He had forgotten that he was not the architect of this life. He was just a tenant. Otis let out a long breath, a sound that was half sigh, half growl. He reached out with his weathered hand and picked up the navy blue folder I had placed in front of him. It was the only folder on the table that mattered. It contained a document from 1990, signed in blue ink, that had faded slightly with time but was still legally binding. Otis lifted the folder, and then with a sudden violent motion threw it down onto the center of the table. The sound was explosive. It was a sharp, flat crack that made Tanisha jump in her seat. The folder slid across the polished wood and came to a stop right in front of my father. Wrong, Otis barked. The single word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My father blinked, staring at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. What? What do you mean wrong? I mean you are a liar, Marcus. Otis said, his voice rising for the first time. Or perhaps you are just senile, because you do not own this house. You never have. And if you continue to behave this way, you never will. The room went deathly silent. Brad lowered his beer bottle to the floor. Evelyn stopped breathing. Otis leaned forward, the shadows deepening on his face. Open it, he commanded. My father's hand trembled as he reached for the folder. He flipped it open. His eyes scanned the first page. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. It started at his cheeks and washed down to his neck, leaving him looking gray and sickly. What is this? Marcus whispered. This says irrevocable trust. Read the beneficiary line, Otis said. Read it out loud. Marcus swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. The beneficiary is Simone Marie Jackson. Tanisha gasped. She turned to look at me, her mouth hanging open. Simone, but she was 12 years old when we moved here. Otis ignored her. He kept his eyes locked on his son. I bought this property 22 years ago, Otis said. And I knew back then, Marcus, that you were not good with money. I knew you liked to look rich more than you liked to be rich. I knew if I gave this house to you, you would mortgage it to buy flashy cars or fun vacations you could not afford, so I did not give it to you. Otis pointed a finger at me. I put it in a trust for the only person in this family who showed promise. I put it in a trust for Simone. It matures when she turns 35 or upon my death or... And this is the important part. upon her discretion if the caretakers prove incompetent. Caretakers, Evelyn squeaked. Her voice was thin and terrified. Otis turned to look at her. Yes, Evelyn. Caretakers. He gestured to the document again. Look at Clause 4. It designates Marcus and Evelyn Jackson as resident caretakers. You were allowed to live here rent-free. You were allowed to raise your children here. In exchange, you were supposed to maintain the property and provide a stable environment for the beneficiary. That was the deal. You were not the kings and queens of this castle. You were the staff. The word hit them like a physical blow. Staff. My mother, who prided herself on being the lady of the manor who looked down on service workers who bragged to her church friends about her estate, was effectively the live-in janitor. This cannot be legal, Brad blurted out. He looked panicked. He looked like a rat realizing the ship was not just sinking, but that it had never been a ship at all. It was a raft. It is ironclad, I spoke up from the end of the table. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with their panic. I had David review it this morning. It is a binding contract, and you have violated it. Marcus slammed the folder shut. No, he shouted. This is a trick. Dad, you cannot do this. We have lived here for decades. We are your family. You cannot humiliate us like this in front of him. He pointed at Brad. Otis laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. You humiliated yourself, Marcus. You stood there and told me you were going to take Simone's child. You threatened to use the court system to steal my great-grandson because you wanted to keep your credit cards active. You broke the most sacred rule of this family. You chose money over blood. Otis stood up slowly. He leaned heavily on his cane, but he looked 10 feet tall. You thought you were the owner, Otis said, looking down at his son with pity. But you were just a guest, and guests can be asked to leave, especially when they start stealing the silverware. My parents sat frozen. The arrogance that had defined them for my entire life had evaporated. They looked small. They looked exposed. For the first time, they were seeing the reality of their existence. They were not the powerful patriarch and matriarch. They were squatters, and the landlord had just walked in with the keys. I watched Tanisha. She was looking at our parents with a mix of horror and betrayal. She realized then that the golden parachute she thought she had was full of holes. She realized that the people she had aligned herself with, the people she had helped bully me, were powerless. Otis sat back down. He smoothed his tie. Now, he said, his voice returning to a calm, deadly register. Let us talk about the eviction, because according to Simone's timeline, you are already packing. My father's hands were shaking so hard that the blue folder rattled against the mahogany table. He stared at the legal document as if it were written in a foreign language, desperate to find a loophole, a typo, anything that would undo the reality staring him in the face. But there were no loopholes. My grandfather Otis had built his empire on ironclad contracts, and this was his masterpiece. I tapped the enter key on my laptop. On the large television screen behind me, the document appeared in high resolution. A bright yellow highlight box animated across the screen, zooming in on a specific paragraph near the bottom of page 4. Turn your attention to the screen, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. If the legal jargon is too dense for you, Dad, allow me to translate. This is Article 4, Paragraph B. It is titled, The Caretaker Residency Provision. I waited a beat, letting them look at the words. Read it, I commanded. My mother squinted at the screen, her lips moving silently. Then she stopped, her face paling even further under her heavy makeup. I will read it for the record, I said. It states that the caretakers defined here as Marcus and Evelyn Jackson are granted license to occupy the primary residence solely for the purpose of providing a stable, supportive, and safe environment for the beneficiary Simone Marie Jackson. I paused, locking eyes with my mother. It continues, I said, my voice dropping an octave. This license is revocable immediately and without notice upon any evidence of abuse, neglect, financial exploitation, or actions that endanger the physical or emotional well-being of the beneficiary. Abuse. My mother sputtered, finding her voice. Neglect. How dare you? We have never abused you. We fed you. We clothed you. We gave you a home. Just because we went on a vacation does not mean we neglected you. You are twisting words, Simone. You are trying to paint us as monsters to your grandfather. Otis turned his head slowly to look at her. His eyes were unreadable. Is she? Otis asked. Is she twisting words, Evelyn? Because leaving a child in a hospital alone sounds like neglect to me. It was a misunderstanding, Marcus interjected quickly, sweat dripping down his temple. We thought she was fine. She said she was fine. We didn't know the severity. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that didn't reach my eyes. You didn't know, I repeated. Let us check the record. I clicked the next slide on my laptop. An audio file icon appeared on the screen. It was labeled Incoming Call, ER, November 12th. I pressed play. The sound of my mother's voice filled the dining room, amplified by the surround sound speakers. It was crisp and clear, stripped of the excuses she was trying to make now. Simone, are you serious right now? We are literally boarding the ship. Tanisha needs this trip. We cannot just turn around because you were not driving carefully. The recording continued. The sound of steel drums in the background was jarringly cheerful against the desperation in my recorded voice asking for help. Do not be selfish. Hire a night nurse. Bye. The audio cut off. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother shrank into her chair, unable to look at Otis. Tanisha covered her mouth with her hand. That was the neglect, I said calmly. Now let us talk about the endangerment. I looked at Brad. He was staring at the table, his knuckles white as he gripped his beer bottle. He knew what was coming. You said I was paranoid, Dad, I said. You said I was hallucinating thieves in the night. You said I was unfit to be a mother because I was erratic. I clicked the next file. This was recorded at 2 in the morning 2 nights ago inside my home office, I narrated. I pressed play. Brad's voice boomed through the speakers, low and menacing. You cannot trespass in your own house, and I need that card. The truck payment is tomorrow. Then came the threat, clear as day. It would be a shame if you fell out of that chair, or if you slipped in the shower. People might think you were just clumsy. You cannot protect that baby if you are laid up in a hospital bed again. I stopped the recording. Tanisha turned slowly to look at her husband. Her eyes were wide with horror. Not because she cared about my safety, but because she realized he had just destroyed their defense. You threatened her, Tanisha whispered. You threatened to hurt her. I didn't mean it, Brad stammered, his face flushing red. I was just trying to get the number. I wouldn't have actually touched her. She is manipulating the context. Otis slammed his hand onto the table. The sound was like a thunderclap. Context, Otis roared. He stood up, leaning heavily on his cane, his face twisted in a fury I had not seen in 30 years. You walked into my granddaughter's room in the middle of the night, Otis shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Brad. You threatened a woman in a wheelchair. You threatened a mother with her infant son. In my house. Otis turned to my father. And you, Marcus. You called her crazy. You tried to gaslight her into believing she was the problem so you could keep spending her money. You allowed this predator to live under the same roof as your daughter. But Dad, Marcus pleaded, standing up. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he did that. It does not matter what you knew, Otis said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. It matters what you allowed. You failed to protect the beneficiary. In fact, you became the threat. Otis reached out and closed the blue folder. He smoothed the cover with his hand. I established this trust to ensure Simone would always have a sanctuary, Otis said. A place where she would be safe. You have turned it into a den of vipers. He looked at me, then back at my parents. You have violated Article 4, Paragraph B, Otis declared. The condition of your residency is void. The contract is breached. He looked at my father with eyes that were no longer angry, just tired and resolved. You are no longer the caretakers, Otis said. You are trespassers. And as the executor of this trust, I am terminating your license to occupy this property. Effectively, immediately. The silence in the dining room was thick enough to choke on. My parents were slumped in their chairs looking like statues of defeated monarchs. They had just lost their kingdom. But my grandfather Otis was not finished cleaning house. He slowly rotated his high-backed leather chair 45 degrees to the right. His dark eyes, sharp as flint, locked onto the man sitting next to my sister. Brad was trying to make himself invisible. He was hunched over his beer bottle staring at the label as if it contained the secrets of the universe. He was sweating. He knew that the predator had just become the prey. "And you," Otis said. The two words were spoken softly, but they landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. Brad looked up, his face a mask of forced innocence. "Me, sir. I didn't do anything. I was just defending my wife." Otis did not blink. He reached into the blue folder again and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a deed. It was a ledger. "You are Brad Miller, correct?" Otis asked. "Yes, sir." Brad nodded eagerly. "Tanisha, husband. We have been married for 2 years. I am family." Otis let out a short, dry laugh. He shook his head slowly. "No, son. You are not family, not according to this trust, and definitely not according to me." Otis placed the paper on the table and smoothed it out with his palm. "Let us look at Article 5, Clause C," Otis said. "It is what we call the guest limitation clause. It states clearly that no individual who is not a direct blood descendant of the grantor, that is me, may reside on the premises for more than 72 consecutive hours without written permission from the trustee." Otis looked at me. "I was the trustee?" Simone Otis asked. "Did you give this man written permission to move in?" "No, grandfather," I said, my voice cold. "I asked him to leave 3 times in the last year. He refused. He told me that since he married Tanisha, he owned half of her share." Otis turned back to Brad. A cruel smile played on the old man's lips. "There are no shares, Brad. Tanisha owns nothing. Marcus owns nothing. Which means you, by extension, own less than nothing. You are what the law calls an unauthorized occupant." Brad swallowed hard. "Okay, so I stayed a little too long. I can pack a bag. I can go stay at my mom's house for a few days until this blows over." Otis tapped the table. "Not so fast. You see, when you violate a residency clause in a commercial trust property, which this is, you are subject to retroactive rent penalties." "Rent," Brad squeaked. Otis nodded. He looked at the ledger in front of him. "I had my accountant run the numbers this morning," Otis said calmly. "The market value for a penthouse of this size in downtown Chicago is roughly $3,000 a month per room. You have occupied the master guest suite for 24 months. Otis did the mental math, though I knew he had the figure memorized. "That is 24 months at $3,000 a month. That comes to $72,000. Brad jaw dropped. His eyes bulged out of his head. "72,000, he shouted, standing up. "You are crazy. I do not have that kind of money. I drive a truck. I work part-time." "Then I suggest you get a full-time job," Otis said, his voice turning into a growl. "Because I am instructing Simone to file a lien against your wages and your assets. We will take your truck. We will take your savings. And if you do not pay, we will file a civil suit for theft of services." "You cannot do that," Brad stammered, looking frantically at Tanisha. "Tanisha, tell him. Tell him we are married. Tell him I am good to you." Tanisha did not speak. She was staring at her husband, her face pale. She was realizing that the man who claimed to be her provider, the man who demanded respect, was actually just a squatter with a massive debt hanging over his head. Brad turned to my father. "Marcus, help me out here. You invited me. You said I could stay as long as I wanted. You said this was your house." Marcus did not look up. He was too busy mourning his own loss to care about his son-in-law. "I am not finished," Otis interrupted. He pointed a finger directly at Brad's chest. "You threatened my granddaughter," Otis said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You threatened to hurt her physically." That is not just a civil matter, boy. That is criminal. I could have the police here in 10 minutes to arrest you for domestic intimidation. Brad took a step back, knocking his chair over. It clattered loudly against the floor, but he didn't pick it up. He looked like a cornered animal. I am leaving, Brad said, his voice high and panic-stricken. I am leaving right now. You people are crazy. This is a trap. He turned to Tanisha. He grabbed her arm, his grip rough and desperate. Come on, Tanisha. We are getting out of here. Pack your stuff. We are going to my mom's house. Tanisha pulled her arm back. She looked at him with confusion. But Brad, your mom lives in a one-bedroom apartment. Where are we going to sleep? On the couch, Brad snapped. Who cares? We have to go. They are going to sue me, Tanisha. Did you hear him? 72 grand. I am ruined. He looked at her, and for the first time the mask slipped completely. The charm was gone. The swagger was gone. All that was left was the ugly, selfish greed that had driven him to marry her in the first place. And this is your fault, Brad hissed at her. You told me they were rich. You told me the house was yours. You lied to me. I watched the realization wash over Tanisha's face. It was brutal. She had spent 2 years believing this man loved her, for her beauty, for her personality. Now, in the harsh light of the dining room chandelier, she saw the truth. He had loved the penthouse. He had loved the free rent. He had loved the credit cards. You are blaming me, Tanisha whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I am your wife. I am pregnant. Brad scoffed. He looked at her stomach with disdain. Are you? He sneered. Or is that just another lie to get a bigger allowance from your sister? Because right now, Tanisha, you look like a liability to me. You come with 0 assets and $72,000 in debt. He let go of her arm and stepped back. I am not taking you with me, Brad said coldly. I have enough problems. You stay here with your crazy family. I am done. He turned his back on her. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Otis. He walked straight toward the front door, leaving his wife sobbing at the table, realizing that the gold mine she thought she was sharing had just collapsed on top of her. The sound of the front door slamming shut was the final period at the end of their marriage, and I sat there watching the wreckage, feeling absolutely nothing but the satisfaction of a debt finally being collected. The front door slammed shut, and the vibration seemed to shake the crystals on the chandelier. For a second, the only sound in the dining room was Tanisha's ragged breathing. She stood near the entryway, staring at the closed door, her hands clutching her stomach. Then she turned around. The look on her face was not grief. It was pure, unadulterated venom. And for the first time in her life, she did not aim it at me. She aimed it at the 2 people sitting at the table. You did this! Tanisha screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. She marched back toward the table, her eyes wild. You told him the house was ours. You told him we were set for life. You lied to him, and now he is gone. My mother. Evelyn flinched as if she had been slapped. Do not raise your voice at me, Tanisha. I am your mother. Brad left because he is a coward, a gold digger. You are better off without him. Better off, Tanisha laughed, a hysterical manic sound. I am pregnant, Mom. I have no job. I have no husband. And thanks to Grandpa, I have $72,000 of debt hanging over my head. How am I better off? She grabbed a wine glass from the table and hurled it against the wall. Its shattered red wine spraying across the expensive beige wallpaper like arterial spray. This is your fault, Dad, Tanisha spat, turning on Marcus. You walked around like you were the king of Chicago. My house, my rules, my legacy. It was all fake. You are just a squatter in a suit. Marcus stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. Watch your mouth, girl. I provided for you for 28 years. I gave you everything you wanted. You gave me nothing, Tanisha yelled back. You gave me an illusion. You let me believe I was a princess so I would never have to work. And now I am almost 30 with no skills and no home. You crippled me, Dad. You made me useless. The accusation hit home. I watched my father recoil, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked for a target, someone to deflect the blame onto. His eyes landed on his wife. You spoiled her, Marcus roared at Evelyn. I told you to make her finish beauty school. I told you to stop buying her things. But no, you wanted to be the cool mom. You wanted to be her best friend. You created this mess, Evelyn. You and your spending. Me! Evelyn shrieked, standing up to meet him. She knocked her chair over in her haste. You are the one who insisted on the Lincoln. You are the one who needed the country club membership we could not afford. I spent money to keep up the image you demanded, Marcus. You wanted people to think you were a big shot. You wanted to hide the fact that you were living off your father's charity. I watched them from the end of the table. It was fascinating. It was grotesque. It was a masterclass in dysfunction. For years they had been a united front, a three-headed dragon breathing fire at me. But the moment the money ran out, the heads started eating each other. They were tearing at old wounds, bringing up grudges from decades ago. I reached for the porcelain teapot in the center of the table. It was still warm. I poured myself a cup of Earl Grey. The steam curled up into the tense air. I lifted the cup to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The tea was bitter, but the moment was sweet. I felt like I was sitting in the front row of a theater, watching the climax of a tragedy I had written. You are a failure, Marcus, Evelyn screamed, pointing a manicured nail at his chest. A failure as a provider. A failure as a father. And now look, your own father is kicking us out because you could not keep your ego in check. Shut up, Evelyn, Marcus yelled, grabbing a napkin holder and throwing it across the room. It clattered loudly against the floor. At the head of the table, Otis had not moved. He watched the chaos with eyes that were cold and hard. He did not look surprised. He looked resigned. He had known this was underneath the surface all along. He had just removed the lid. Otis reached into his inside pocket and pulled out a gold fountain pen. He unscrewed the cap slowly, deliberately. He opened the blue folder again. Silence, Otis commanded. His voice was not a shout, but it cut through their screaming match instantly. They froze, chests heaving, faces flushed with rage and embarrassment. They looked at the old man, remembering suddenly that he held their fate in his hands. Sit down, Otis said. They did not sit. They stood there, surrounded by broken glass and broken trust. I have seen enough, Otis said. He looked at the document in front of him. It was the formal eviction notice and lease termination. You blame each other, Otis said, his voice quiet. You blame the husband who left. You blame the daughter who stopped paying. But not once in all this noise did I hear anyone take responsibility. Not once did I hear an apology to Simone. He looked at me. I raised my teacup in a silent toast. You are not a family, Otis continued. You are a corporation of greed, and you just went bankrupt. He pressed the nib of the pen to the paper. The scratching sound was audible in the silence. He signed his name with a flourish. Otis Jackson, trustee. He closed the folder and pushed it down the table. It slid past the wine stain, past the abandoned plates, and came to rest in front of my father. You have 30 days, Otis said. But Dad, Marcus whispered, his voice broken. 30 days. Where will we go? We have no savings. The credit cards are frozen. That sounds like a problem for the caretakers, Otis said, standing up. He picked up his cane and his hat. I suggest you start packing tonight, he added. And Marcus. My father looked up, tears streaming down his face. Do not take the furniture, Otis said. It belongs to the trust. Otis turned to me. Come, Simone. Walk me to the car. I think this meeting is adjourned. I set my teacup down. I engaged the motor of my wheelchair. As I turned to follow my grandfather, I looked back one last time. Tanisha was slumped on the floor, sobbing into her hands. Evelyn was staring blankly at the wall. Marcus was holding the eviction notice, his hands shaking so hard the paper made a rattling sound. They were alone together. And they deserved each other. I rolled out of the dining room, leaving the ruins of their arrogance behind me. The air in the hallway tasted cleaner. It tasted like justice. The 30 days that followed the meeting with my grandfather were not a grace period. They were a slow-motion collapse of a house of cards. The penthouse, which had once vibrated with the noise of reality television and loud arguments, transformed into a landscape of cardboard boxes and packing tape. The air grew stale, heavy with the dust of moved furniture and the suffocating tension of people who had lost everything but their resentment. Brad did not wait for the month to end. He did not even wait for the sun to rise the next morning. The ink on the eviction notice was barely dry before he was stuffing his limited edition sneakers into black garbage bags. I watched from the balcony as he loaded his truck. Tanisha was standing in the driveway barefoot and sobbing, clutching the door handle of his Ford F-150. "You cannot leave me!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the brickwork of the driveway. "We are married. I am carrying your child." Brad did not look at her. He shoved her hand away from the truck with a brutality that made me wince. "I am not going down with this ship, Tanisha," he shouted, revving the engine. "You lied to me. You said you had money. You are nothing but a liability now. Call a lawyer." He peeled out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on the pavement and his wife collapsing onto the concrete. It was a harsh, ugly end to a romance built entirely on greed. Tanisha came scratching at my door an hour later. Her eyes were swollen, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. She looked like a child who had broken a toy and wanted it fixed. "Simone, please," she wept, leaning against the doorframe. "He left me. I am all alone. I have nowhere to go. You cannot kick me out too. I am your sister." I looked at her, remembering the way she had laughed when I was stuck in the hospital. I remembered the way she had demanded I reopen the credit cards while holding her stomach as a prop. "You are not alone, Tanisha," I said, keeping the security chain on the door. "You have your health, you have your youth, and you have a terrifying amount of debt to work off. I suggest you start looking for a job. UPS is hiring, remember?" "But I am pregnant," she wailed. "Then you better work double shifts," I said, and closed the door. I heard her slide down the woods sobbing, but I did not unlock it. I had saved her from the streets for 10 years. Now she had to save herself. The next 3 weeks were a parade of humiliation for my parents. The living room became a bazaar of desperate commerce. My mother sold her furs to a second-hand consignment shop for pennies on the dollar. She cried as the appraiser told her that her mink coat, which she claimed was worth 10,000, was out of style and worth maybe 800. My father argued with strangers from the internet over the price of his golf clubs in the building lobby, trying to squeeze an extra $50 out of a used driver. They were stripping the copper wiring out of their own lives. The neighbors watched. The doorman watched. The facade of the wealthy, successful Jackson family crumbled in public view. But the final insult came on the 29th day. The movers were downstairs loading the few pieces of furniture that Otis had allowed them to take. I was in the kitchen feeding Leo when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a notification from the new security system I had installed the day after Brad's threat. Motion detected master bedroom. The master bedroom was my room. I had locked it. I opened the app. The live feed showed my mother, Evelyn. She had picked the lock on the bedroom door, a skill I didn't know she possessed. She was standing by my dresser. She wasn't packing. She was stealing. I watched on the small screen as she opened my jewelry box. Her hands were shaking, but they were quick. She grabbed my diamond tennis bracelet, a gift I had bought myself after making partner at the firm. She grabbed the pearl necklace my grandmother Otis's wife had left specifically for me. She slid them into the lining of her coat. I did not yell. I did not rush into the room. I pressed the button on the app that activated the two-way intercom in the camera. "Put it back, Mom." On the screen, Evelyn jumped a foot in the air. She spun around looking for me, clutching her chest. "I am watching you on the camera, Evelyn," I said, my voice projecting from the small speaker on the bookshelf. You have 5 seconds to put the jewelry back on the dresser. If you walk out of that room with my property, I am sending this video to the police. And unlike the eviction jail time, is not something you can negotiate. She stared at the camera lens, her face twisted in a mix of fear and hatred. It is mine, she hissed at the plastic device. I deserve it. After all I did for you. 4 seconds, I counted down. You are a devil, she spat. 3 seconds. She let out a scream of frustration and threw the jewelry back onto the dresser. It clattered loudly. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the camera shook. The next morning, the moving truck pulled away. My parents sat in the front seat of their 10-year-old sedan, a car they had been forced to downgrade to after the leases on the luxury vehicles were canceled. They did not look back, they did not wave. They just drove away, heading toward a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood they used to make fun of. I stood in the center of the living room. The carpet still held the indentations of the furniture they had taken. The walls were bare, where their pretentious art had hung. The air smelled of dust and departure. But as the sound of their engine faded into the city noise, a profound change happened. The house didn't feel empty. It felt light. It felt expansive. For the first time in 32 years, the oxygen in the room was mine. I didn't have to share it with their expectations. I didn't have to filter it through their guilt. I walked over to the sliding glass doors and opened them wide. The wind from Lake Michigan rushed in, cold and clean, sweeping away the stale scent of entitlement. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they ached. I was alone in a 5,000-square-foot penthouse with a broken leg and an infant son. My bank account was intact. My safety was secured, and the silence. The silence was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The landing softened the fall for no one. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom unit on the south side, in a complex where the elevator smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing about money, a cruel mirror to their own new reality. There was no doorman to carry their bags. There was no heated garage for the car. There was just a flickering fluorescent light in the hallway and a key that stuck in the lock if you did not jiggle it just right. For the first time in 20 years, my father Marcus had to set an alarm clock for work. He was 62 years old, his resume filled with gaps and vague consulting roles that were really just him managing his own ego did not impress the corporate recruiters. The only job he could find was as a security guard at an impound lot. I drove past there once weeks later just to see. I saw him standing in the guard booth wearing a polyester uniform that was too tight around the waist. He looked exhausted. The man who used to lecture me about the importance of image while sipping scotch I paid for was now raising a plastic gate for tow trucks. He spent 8 hours a day on his feet, his gout flaring up in the damp cold, guarding wrecked cars that were worth more than his monthly paycheck. My mother Evelyn fared no better. The woman who had spent decades perfecting the art of the leisurely lunch was now scanning barcodes at a discount grocery chain. She stood behind a register for minimum wage, forcing a smile for customers who treated her with the same dismissal she had once shown to waitstaff. The humiliation was not just physical, it was social. One Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Higgins from the Sisters of Grace Prayer Circle came into the store. I heard about this later from a cousin who still spoke to me. Mrs. Higgins was buying cat food. She looked up and saw Evelyn in her red vest bagging cans of tuna. Evelyn, Mrs. Higgins had exclaimed loud enough for the line to hear. I did not know you were volunteering here. That is so noble of you. My mother had to look her old friend in the eye and swallow the bitterest pill of her life. I am not volunteering, she whispered. I work here. Mrs. Higgins had just nodded, a look of pity washing over her face that was worse than judgment. Oh, she said. I see. Well, I will pray for you. That night in their cramped kitchen with the peeling linoleum, the reality of their finances hit them. They sat at a small folding table eating pasta with jarred sauce because they could not afford steak. They looked at their pay stubs, $800 a week combined. They did the math. Rent was $1,200. Utilities were $200. Gas for the car was $50. Food was $300. After taxes and insurance, they had barely enough left over to buy aspirin for their aching backs. My father looked at the numbers and then looked at my mother. "This is impossible," he grumbled, rubbing his swollen ankles. "We cannot live like this. My back is killing me. I cannot stand in that booth another day." "Call her," Evelyn said, staring at her plate. Marcus shook his head. "She kicked us out, Evelyn. She embarrassed us." "Call her," Evelyn repeated, her voice rising. "Tell her we are sorry. Tell her we learned our lesson. Tell her you are sick. Use the gout. She is still our daughter, Marcus. She cannot let us live like animals. She has a heart. We just pushed her too hard. If we beg, she will break. She always breaks." Marcus sighed. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. His screen was cracked, another casualty of their downgrade. He dialed my number. The number he had called 1,000 times to demand money transfer. He put the phone on speaker so Evelyn could hear. They waited. 1 ring, 2 rings, then a click. But it was not my voice. It was not the sound of a daughter answering a call for help. "The number you have dialed is not accepting calls from this line," a robotic female voice announced. "Please hang up and try again." Marcus frowned. He dialed again. "The number you have dialed is not accepting calls from this line." He looked at Evelyn. His face went pale. "She blocked us," he whispered. "Try Tanisha phone," Evelyn said frantically. "Maybe she just blocked you." They called Tanisha. Tanisha, who was currently sleeping on a friend couch and working double shifts at a diner, picked up. "Did she answer you?" Marcus asked. "No." Tanisha snapped, her voice tired and hollow. "I tried calling her yesterday to ask for gas money. Blocked. I tried emailing her. Bounced back. She changed her number, Dad. And she changed her email. She is gone." The line went dead. Marcus placed the phone on the table. The silence that filled the apartment was heavy. It was the silence of a bridge that had been burned so thoroughly that not even the ashes remained. They sat there under the harsh light of the kitchen bulb. For the first time, they were not angry. They were not plotting. They were just old, tired, and poor. They realized then that the ATM was not broken. It had been removed. And the daughter they had treated as a resource was now a ghost, living a life of peace that they could no longer touch, no longer spend, and no longer destroy. The golden hour sun over Chicago is different when you are watching it from a place of peace. 6 months ago, this penthouse was a battlefield. It was a museum of other people's expectations, filled with furniture I was not allowed to sit on, and tension that made the air hard to breathe. Today, the French doors are thrown wide open. The smell of stale beer and expensive perfume is gone, replaced by the scent of basil and wet earth. I sat on the newly renovated terrace watching the 2 most important men in my life. My grandfather Otis was kneeling on a gardening pad, his sleeves rolled up, teaching my 8-month-old son about tomatoes. Leo was sitting in the grass, giggling as he tried to grab the dirt with his chubby hands. Otis laughed, a deep, resonant sound that I realized I had never heard when my parents lived here. He looked younger. The lines of stress around his eyes had softened. Since he moved into the guest suite, the one Brad had held hostage for 2 years, the house finally felt like a home. I looked down at my legs. The cast was gone. The scars were fading, thin white lines that served as a map of where I had been. I flexed my ankle. It was strong. I had spent months in physical therapy learning to walk again, but the physical healing was the easy part. The real rehabilitation was learning to walk through my own life without the heavy weight of guilt dragging me down. My phone buzzed on the patio table. It was an email from the managing partner at my firm. Subject: Senior Partner Promotion. I smiled. I did not feel the frantic need to call my mother and beg for her approval. I did not feel the urge to buy them gifts to celebrate my achievement. I simply replied, "Thank you. I accept." With the toxic noise of my family silenced, my career had skyrocketed. I was no longer distracted by crisis texts in the middle of depositions. I was no longer leaving work early to bail my brother-in-law out of trouble. I was focused. I was sharp. And the firm had noticed. I opened my banking app. It was the first of the month. For a decade, this day used to bring me a sense of dread. It was the day the $5,500 allowance was automatically drained from my account to fund my parents' delusions of grandeur. The notification popped up, scheduled transfer complete. But the money did not go to Marcus and Evelyn. It went to a high-yield investment trust titled Leo Jackson Education Fund. I stared at the number. $5,500. Every single month. By the time Leo was 18, he would not have to beg anyone for anything. He would not have to buy affection. He would have the freedom to be whoever he wanted to be, backed by the resources I was protecting for him. I was breaking the cycle of financial abuse and replacing it with a legacy of generational wealth. Otis looked up from the garden bed, wiping his hands on a rag. "He has your grip, Simone," Otis called out, smiling as Leo clamped his hand around a trowel. "He is going to be a builder, or a lawyer who does not take no for an answer." I picked up my tea and walked over to them. I sat down on the grass, not caring about the silk of my dress. Otis handed me a ripe cherry tomato he had just picked. "You know, grandfather," I said, watching Leo inspect a butterfly, "I used to be terrified of being alone. When I kicked them out, I thought the silence would kill me." Otis nodded, his eyes wise and kind. "And now," I said, taking a breath of the clean, warm air, "I realize I was never alone. I was just crowded." Otis reached out and squeezed my hand. The hand that had signed the eviction notice. The hand that had signed the promotion papers. "Family is not about whose blood runs in your veins, Simone," he said softly. "It is about whose hand you want to hold when things get dark. Your parents. They liked the light you provided, but they did not want to sit with you in the dark." I looked at him. This man who had stepped in when my own father stepped out. This man who had used his own power to empower me. And I looked at Leo. He was innocent. He was safe. He would never know the feeling of being an ATM. He would only know he was loved. I realized then that I had not lost a family. I had pruned a tree. I had cut away the dead, rotting branches that were sucking the life out of the trunk. And now that they were gone, the sunlight could finally reach us. We were blooming. I picked up Leo and kissed his cheek, smelling the baby shampoo and fresh earth. The sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, painting the world in shades of violet and gold. It was the color of royalty. And for the first time in my life, living in my own castle, I finally felt like a queen. The sun has finally set over the Chicago skyline, painting the glass railings of my balcony in shades of deep indigo and violet. I turned my wheelchair around, not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of where I started. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and walked to the edge of the terrace. I looked directly into the camera lens, breaking the invisible wall that had separated my story from your reality for the last 19 chapters. They say you cannot put a price tag on family. I disagree. I put a price tag on mine, and the final audit came out to exactly $660,450. That is the cost of 10 years of silence. That is the cost of buying love that was never actually for sale, only for rent. My mother and father chose a cruise. They chose 7 days of all-you-can-eat buffets and poolside cocktails over the life of their daughter and the safety of their grandson. They thought the price of that ticket was $2,000. They were wrong. The price was access. The price was the privilege of knowing me. The price was the comfort of a retirement they had done nothing to earn. I know there are people watching this who think I was too harsh. I have read the comments in my head before you even typed them. You might think, "But Simone, they are your parents. You only get one set. How could you leave them with nothing?" To you, I say this. I did not leave them with nothing. I left them with exactly what they created. I left them with the consequences of their own choices. I gave them dignity by forcing them to stand on their own 2 feet for the first time in decades. For too long, especially in our community, we carry the weight of what we call the black tax. It is this unspoken, crushing obligation that says if one of us succeeds, we must carry the rest on our backs, even if they are breaking our spines. We are taught that setting boundaries is an act of betrayal. We are taught that saying no to a relative is the same as saying, I hate you. But looking at my grandfather inside that house teaching my son how to build things with his own hands, I realized the truth. Love is not a tax. Love is not a transaction. Love is showing up. Love is answering the phone when the ambulance is screaming in the background. Love is protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them. My parents and my sister loved my wallet. They loved the address. They loved the image of success that I provided for them. But they did not love me. And the moment I stopped paying for their affection disappeared. That is not family. That is a subscription service. And I simply canceled the membership. The camera began to pull back slowly, widening the shot. It revealed the space around me. It was not empty. It was filled with life. Through the glass doors, the warm light of the living room spilled out. You could see Otis sitting in his favorite armchair reading a book. You could see Leo crawling across the rug, chasing a wooden block. There was no clutter. There was no screaming. There was no tension. This piece you see behind me, it cost me everything I thought I knew about loyalty. It cost me the approval of my aunts and cousins. It cost me the illusion of a happy childhood. But it was a bargain. I would pay that price 1,000 times over to ensure that my son never has to buy his way into someone's heart. I want to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest with yourself in the darkness of your own room. Are you setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm? Are you drowning in debt to fund the lifestyle of people who would not throw you a life vest if you were sinking? Do not wait for a car accident to wake you up. Do not wait for a hospital bed to give you clarity. Do not wait until you are broken to realize who is holding the hammer. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt the heavy burden of carrying people who refuse to walk, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Let us break the stigma of the toxic family together. Let us normalize walking away from tables where respect is not being served. My name is Simone. I am a mother. I am a granddaughter. I am a survivor. And for the first time in my life, I am free. I turned back toward the house, walking into the warm light. I slid the glass doors shut, sealing out the cold city wind. The screen began to fade to black, slowly swallowing the image of the penthouse, the garden, and the woman who had reclaimed her life. But the darkness was not silent. In the final second before the video cut completely, a sound filled the air. It was bright. It was pure. It was the sound of a baby laughing loud and unburdened, echoing into a future that was finally truly his own. The most painful lesson I learned is that shared blood does not guarantee shared loyalty. For a decade, I treated my family like a subscription service, hoping my generosity would finally buy their love. I was wrong. You cannot purchase respect from people who only value you as a financial asset. Walking away wasn't an act of abandonment. It was an act of survival. I broke the cycle of abuse to build a legacy of peace for my son. Remember, your first obligation is to protect your own soul, even if it means firing your own family. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic relative to save yourself? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one.